Huawei said it categorically opposed the amendments made by the U.S. Department of Commerce to its foreign direct product rule in a company statement released on Monday. The new rules are just the latest in an ongoing campaign led by the Trump administration against the Chinese telecommunications company on the grounds of a so-called threat to national security. So now, what do the new regulations mean for Huawei and the U.S. and the global supply chain at large? And how do China-U.S. relations fit into the bigger picture? To talk more about this, I'm now joined in Beijing by Professor Zhang Fan, Associate Professor from Beijing Normal University. He's joining us via Skype, and also Einar Tangen, our current affair commentator. Good to see you both. So let me start with you, Einar. With the new rule, U.S. bars semiconductor makers that use U.S. technologies and software in chip design from shipping to Huawei without U.S. government permission. And in its latest response to the U.S. restrictions, Huawei says the U.S. is leveraging its own technology strength to crush companies outside its own borders. This is an official statement I'm reading to our viewers. This will only serve to undermine the trust international companies place in the U.S. technology and supply chains. Ultimately, this will harm U.S. interests. Einar, how big a blow is this to Huawei? What does it mean for Huawei's business?
Well, it's going to put a tremendous amount of pressure for Huawei to find alternate means of production. They need new suppliers. They've recently moved a lot of their business. Their new 710A chip is 7 nanometer is going. I'm sorry, it's a 14 nanometer is going to be made here in China. It's going to be made by a different group. First time that they're cooperating with them. But this is really, really difficult, not just for Huawei, which is going to have challenges, but also, the Taiwanese maker. I mean, they were offered a $12 billion to build a $12 billion plant in Arizona. But now that they've lost one of their biggest customers, how are they going to pay for it, even if the U.S. is sweetening the deal? So this is just not about Huawei. It's about all of these different players in this very complex field that's interconnected.
Yeah, this first happened a year ago, right? The U.S. moved a year ago to cut off Huawei from access to U.S.-made semiconductor chips, which form really the backbone of most computers and phone systems. Professor Zhang, let me bring you into this. Since the U.S.'s actions last year, what has been the impact on Huawei's business? What actions has it taken to adapt to the new challenges?
Well, it's quite interesting. Huawei has been extremely successful in terms of replacing U.S. components from its equipment. For example, the new P40 phone, it has barely 1% of U.S. components in it. So part of this new strategy the U.S. is adopting, I think it's kind of going after damage control, because they didn't expect what they did is actually pushing Huawei to replace, especially the chips. The U.S. chips. That's one area that U.S. actually was dominating. So now they're risking losing that. So I think they're kind of trying to force Huawei back into buying the U.S. Chips. That's why they're giving permission for U.S. companies to keep working with Huawei, and also, for example, other companies like Qualcomm, if they want to sell chips to Huawei using equipment made by the U.S., they're not actually subject to this licensing rule.
And also talk to us about these domestically made chips, Professor Zhang. I know you're an expert on this. Just days before the newest measures were announced, Huawei announced the launch of the Kirin 710A chip. This is the first ever completely domestically produced chipset in China. I mean, how has the company been upgrading itself despite the U.S. moves? How has Huawei been preparing for something like this, Professor?
They are kind of preparing for it for some time. So they've been stockpiling stuff from late last year, and also shifting some of the contracts to the Chinese SMIC. So the Chinese mainline Chinese company, it's kind of a trailing player as compared to Taiwan Semi. So they can do 14 nanometer, while the U.S. can do, while the Taiwan Semi can do 7 nanometer. So the smaller the number, the better. And the Taiwan Semi is going to start doing 5 nano. But the Chinese one will start doing 7. They're going to skip 10 and go to 7 straight away at the end of this year. So they're not that far behind. And also, when you talk about them being behind, it's not necessarily due to technical competency issue. It's just sometimes it's just because it's a smaller player, so it's better for them to concentrate on the sort of more fringe markets rather than just putting too much resources on the absolute cutting edge and then fight for contract that way, because the contract are really far and few in between, and people don't want to try out new players. But now, because of the U.S. action, they get a guaranteed customer, so good news for them.
And the company's head, Zhang Fan, did say in an interview last year he feels confident that the company will eventually make chips as good as those made in the United States. But on the same day as the announcement, the U.S. extended waivers that allow U.S. companies, many of them are rural internet providers, to use some kind of Huawei technology for another 90 days, so a grace period. Einar, what happens when those 90 days are up? Is the U.S. not hurt by targeting Huawei? I mean, what are the possible consequences in the States?
Well, a while back they passed a bill through Congress that would give, in essence, aid to these rural western states that have been using Huawei because it's cheap and they work. Obviously they have large expanses, very few customers per square mile, so they opted for the best way of doing it. Now, this was in no way a compromise to security. These are just purely radios. They don't even they just relay information. But such is the paranoia and the extent of the, this attack, not only on Huawei. Remember, ZTE is in there. And, let's look at the tactics that are playing. I mean, Ms. Ma is still in Canada awaiting her fate in terms of these things. So what you have here is it's not so much reality as politics, kind of like the WHO situation. You have a substitute for substance in just using rhetoric.
It's all about politics these days. But also, there's another thing happening interesting on the U.S. soil, Einar. Huawei is the largest customer of chips for the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp. The U.S. Commerce Department, though, announced the new export control rules on the same day. TSMC, this Taiwan company, said it would invest $12 billion into building a factory in an undetermined site in Phoenix, in Arizona, which has been warmly welcomed by the U.S. federal government. The timing, according to the U.S. government, was purely coincidental. But Einar, what do you think of the timing here? Is there anything also political behind TSMC's decision?
Well, yes, it is political. I mean, for Donald Trump, Arizona is a soft state. It's one he wants to hold. Obviously, he's running behind in polls there. This would be a boost to his campaign. He can say he brought it there. But there might be some skepticism. There was a similar deal that was announced with Foxconn a couple of years ago. Nothing ever came of it because it just wasn't, it didn't pan out. They got the land, but it's still basically vacant. They say they're going to be making respirators, but they seem to change quite a bit. So, whether this actually will ever come to fruition is another thing. Remember, they're losing their one of their biggest customers in terms of Huawei. So, you build this plant, you have to have customers. Who are they going to sell to? And by the way, this is a 5 nanometer fab facility, but by that time, 3 nanometer will be the cutting edge. So there's a real question by 2024, when this comes into operation, just how important this facility will be. And just wait till you hear the price tag of what the U.S. government offered to get them to commit to this deal.
Yeah, and the Trump administration wants to rebuild the U.S. production capability within its own territory. But given all the trouble it faces amid the pandemic now, Professor Zhang, is the U.S. independent and strong enough to move everything back to form a complete production chain there? How far away is the U.S. from being able to do that? And is it worth it?
Well, you already answered the question, right? It's a chain. So the final product might be made by a U.S. company, although around half of the stuff sold in the U.S. With U.S. logo on it is actually made by Chinese companies. The U.S. company only just buy them. It's called OEM. They just buy them and put a logo on them. The company's Chinese. They're not going to move to the U.S. And also further down the chain, the whole thing is in China. I mean, if they move the final thing overseas a little bit, they might be able to move it to Vietnam, to nearby regions. But if they move all the way back to the U.S., all the raw materials going to come back and forth between the U.S. and China. It's going to cost them tremendous amount of money. So this is not going to work. I mean, this kind of forced government moves. It's just going to increase cost for the companies. For example, the Taiwan Semi thing. Taiwan Semi is not the only one that's being forced into. Well, I don't know how much coercion is involved, but they're building one. Intel is building one in Oregon. And the U.S. domestic market is only 10% of the global semiconductor market, and they will all be fighting for that market share. I mean, no Chinese companies would dare to rely itself on a factory built inside the U.S. because of the government meddling, right? The supply chain may be cut. So this sort of thing, I don't see it ending well, to be honest.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, running out of time. Thank you very much, Professor Zhang Fan, joining us in Beijing there, and our current affair, Einar Tangen, joining us live. And this is this edition of The Point. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle, The Point with LX. Download the CGTN app to watch our show, and go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thank you for watching. Take care.